So here we are. We're going to go after the pulse generators. If you watched the diag video that I put out last week, you'll know that we have a bad pulse generator in there. I believe it's the 1.3. It ohmed out at 12.3 mega ohms, something like that. So that's underneath this side cover. So we'll go ahead and take this side cover off. The side cover does have two dowel pins that are holding it in once the bolts come out. There's one in the front and one in the back. So we got to gently get this thing off without hurting that aluminum. But we'll wiggle that off and it'll come out of there pretty easily. Right? And once we get that side cover off, then we're going to go after these two pulse generators, right? Now, the Japanese use a JIS screwdriver, and I wasn't really aware of that for a long time, but I went out and bought these vessel screwdrivers because somebody said that they were pretty good. And I think JIS stands for Japanese Imperial System, but they definitely work better than my set of American Snap-on screwdrivers on these Japanese bikes. So we'll take this thing out. There's two grommets right here that go through the casing that keep that from leaking. Also, there's a 10 millimeter bolt that we're going to loosen up and let that wiring harness come out, because there's a little hanger that keeps that wiring harness up there. And then you'll notice that oil pressure switch is also connected, so we'll unscrew that a little later. Next thing I thought we'd talk about is all these gears. So that's your starter motor right there. That turns this big gear, which is connected to this smaller gear. That smaller gear turns that big drum, right? And that drum is a one-way clutch. So it turns this as the engine spins from the starter, it pulls the engine along. As soon as I get RPM, that one-way clutch behind that drum allows all these gears to stop spinning, right? So that's how your starting system works. Now, this gear is connected to that gear, which is connected to the crankshaft. This gear back here goes over to your transmission, right? So your transmission's connected to your clutch. This is your clutch drum right here. So you have your engine, your crankshaft connected to your transmission. And then the transmission is obviously going to be controlled through this clutch drum. Now down here you have the oil pump, and the oil pump is connected by a chain to the transmission. So as the engine turns, we get oil pressure. This over here is going to be connected to our shift shaft. And then up in here is where our transmission starts to roll around. So let's go over to the other side of the motor and we'll show you. So over here, here's our hydraulic clutch. So when you pull in your lever, it pushes that hydraulically, it pushes a pin across to that clutch. So it disengages or puts a gap in there, right? Then here's your shifter. That shifter goes across to that pin that I showed you at the bottom, right? And as you move this thing back and forth, it's going to turn this drum up here. Now that drum is inside the center casings. And over here, this is where that pin disengages the clutch. So that puts a gap in the clutch and allows you to engage or disengage. So now let's talk about why we're here. We're here to replace these two pulse generators, right? This is what sends the signal back to the CDI units or the ignition boxes that are going to eventually send the signal to the coil. So the way this thing works is as that drum spins around that high point that you see above the screwdriver right now in that 2.4 pulse igniter, as that spins underneath there, pulse igniter is going to send a signal back to the ignition box. Then 270 degrees later, it's going to send a signal to this. Then 90 degrees later, it sends a signal to that one. So then they go back and forth, back and forth. And then that runs up to this connector right here that goes into the main harness that runs back to your two CDI units or your ignition boxes, whatever you want to call them. As you can see there, the one box is bigger than the other box. And the reason for that is one box controls not only the spark, but it also controls the fuel pump. So it turns on the fuel pump once it sees RPM. So there's your fuel pump. And so that's going to be turned on and off by the ignition unit as soon as it sees RPM. I guess when you crash, it shuts off the fuel pump and makes things safe. Here's your coils, right? This is a waste spark system, so you only have two coils, right? It's going to fire the 1 and 3, and then it's going to fire the 2 and 4. So it's going to fire the back cylinder, then the front cylinder, then the back cylinder, then the front cylinder. And it's going to fire two cylinders at the same time. And the reason why it's called waste spark is because you have two spark plug wires coming out of one coil, and they're going to fire two cylinders. Now, the cylinder that has fuel in it is obviously the one that's going to push the piston down. The other one is the wasted spark. So that's how the waste spark system works. That's how your ignition system works. Hopefully, this gives you a better idea of the system and how it's controlled. So now we're just going to put these in, and they're just in by Phillips head screwdrivers. There's two 10 millimeter bolts are not adjustable. You can loosen them up, but it doesn't change the bracket height at all. The Phillips head screws don't change the height at all. You kind of got to bend them up and bend them down. The specification is 0.3 to 0.9 millimeters, which is 12 thousandths to 35 thousandths. This front one I got to about 48.48 millimeters, and the second one I got to about 5.53 millimeters. So I'm right in the middle of the specification. So I'm going to leave the old cover gasket on here for now because I'm going to take it back apart later. But just be aware that there's 3 points that you have to watch when you put it on. There's two dowel pins and one of the gears sits in the cover. So there's 3 spots that have to line up. There are short bolts and long bolts, so make sure you get them in the right spots. And other than that, it looks good. Let's see if we can't get this thing to fire up. All right. Well, it looks like I lost this last piece of video. I must have deleted it or something. I'm not sure what happened to it, but I hooked up a temporary gas can to the carburetors, filled the carburetors up. They leaked fuel everywhere, so the carburetors got to come apart. I put starter fluid in it. It did run, ran like crap, but it ran. There was just fuel just pouring from everywhere. But I know now that I have a spark, so I fixed one problem because the bike does run. Now I have to pull the carbs out and go from there. So thanks for watching this video. I greatly appreciate it. If you could like and subscribe, I'd appreciate that as well. The next one, I guess, will be tearing apart these carburetors. All right, take care. Thank you.